Hey friends, Seeking Our Spirit is back with episode 41. I got to sit down with my good friend Earle Wright, chat about his life. Recently, we've had a couple episodes that I think are going to need a part two, and this is one of them. Earle's got a big story and a lot to dig into, so hope you enjoy this, and maybe we'll get to sit down with him again. As always, best way to support the show, if you're enjoying it, is come on and tell your story. You all have a story, and I would love to sit down and talk to you, so let me know, or send me names of folks that you think would be good on the show. You can also call a Google Voice number, 615-933-9737, and just share a story with us there, and we'll feature it on the show. And other ways to support is just keep on hitting the like and subscribe buttons. You can hit the support button and donate a few dollars every month, and follow us on YouTube. So appreciate all the encouragement and support, and hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll talk to you soon. Peace. All right, my friend Earle Wright, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be with you. Thank you for letting me into your home and allowing me to rearrange things in your living room so that we can record. I'm excited to have this conversation with you, so thanks for your willingness. As always, why don't we dive in by just having you say a little bio about yourself, who you are, kind of what you did in life, where you're from, just brief.
Okay, I'm 76 years old next month. I grew up in Greenville, Tennessee. I moved to Knoxville in 1966 to attend UT, and I basically made some good grades for a while, but I couldn't keep it up because of my upbringing. I was not allowed to do anything. Couldn't date, couldn't go to dances at school, nothing.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I was, I had good grades. I was a junior class and senior class president, boys state representative. I was Jack Armstrong, the All-American boy. But my parents wouldn't let me do anything, wouldn't let my sister either.
Was that religious reasons, or what was, they just restrict?
They were extremely strict, and I'm not sure where it came from. It could have come from experiences my father had had, and
Yeah.
I know my mother was quite provincial in her upbringing, but she was probably the only child who grew beyond that. And both parents were smart, and they passed that on to us as far as education, grades, and so forth. I came to hate them, however, because wasn't allowed to do anything.
Right.
Just nothing.
Probably had some rebellion happen at some point.
Once the day I got out of Greenville, yeah.
Yeah. So where did that lead you in terms of, like you were saying, you were making good grades and then you didn't? So...
Well, I wanted to say one more thing about the high school experience. Mm-hmm. I was a senior, and I had a bit of a crush on this sister of a friend of mine that we played in a little trio. And I wanted to take her to a Disney matinee.
Uh-huh.
And they wouldn't let me.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked why, and they said she's too young, sophomore.
Yeah. You were a senior?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And if it hadn't been that, it would have been something else. There was always an excuse.
Right.
And once I got out of Greenville, the downside of being raised like that is I went absolutely wild. Mm-hmm. Sex and alcohol. Mm-hmm. Back and forth. And the very first drink I had, I wanted to get drunk.
Yeah.
I wanted to suppress or hide the feelings that I'd grown up with.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt very disadvantaged because I did not know how to relate to girls at all. And I don't know that I've learned that much more.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I've been through 2 marriages, 2 divorces, and my family did not communicate about anything. Mm. We had 2 emotions in my family: euphoria and rage. That was it. And euphoria was over if the Cleveland Indians won.
Yeah.
There was euphoria. Everything else was rage. And if I did anything wrong in my father's eyes, I had to drop my pants to my ankles, lean over the end of the couch. He'd double up a leather strap and whip me until I had welts from just above my knees to my lower back. And he'd say, "Are you sorry?" I'd say, "Yes, I'm sorry." And then he'd do it over again and say, "Are you sorry?" And I'd say, "Yes, I'm sorry." The whole while I'm thinking, what do I say to make this stop?
Yeah.
It stopped when he got tired of it.
Yeah. Man.
I dreaded seeing my parents when they'd come to visit, especially after I had my first son. I didn't have anything in common with them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went home for various holidays or whatever, I was uncomfortable the entire time I was there. Okay, enough about them. I started in architecture, and they required 22 quarter hours every quarter because they had 600 and something students in a new school of architecture. Out of that 630 something, I believe it was, they graduated 2.
Whoa. This is UT? Where is this? Uh-huh. Wow.
Graduated 2. So also the freshman classes were bigger than UT could handle in general. So they would alternate between world history and English on flunking kids out. One year it was English, next year it's or next quarter, whatever.
To try to weed kids out?
Oh yeah, and they could do it.
Wow.
My history teacher came in, first day of class. He got up in front of the class and he said, "In this class there will be," the class was probably, I'm going to say 60 people.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "In this class there will be 1 A. There will be 1 B. There will be 2 C's. There will be, I think it was 1 D." And he said, "The rest of you will fail."
Wow.
And then he turned around to the board and he started lecturing. So that was the welcome to the class. And I decided, pardon me, I decided I'm going to pass this damn thing.
Yeah.
And I got a B.
Wow.
But I worked very hard for it. And fortunately, I qualified for honors English and honors math.
Mm-hmm.
And honors English was the best thing that ever happened to me. I still remember my professor and the poem we studied. I'm not a big poetry reader, but the poem we studied means a lot to me because we spent 2-3 weeks on it, interpretation of it. It's Spring and Fall to a Young Child by Gerard Manley Hopkins, who's mainly a religious poet. A little difficult to understand. I hung on. Well, let's see, I flunked out in my third quarter. I went up to East Tennessee State, and really, they called it Easy T for a reason. You could pass there and not do too much. I don't know if it's still that way or not.
No.
And then I came back to UT, and things were so critical for me. I cut 3 out of 5 finals to ensure that I would flunk out. And I joined the Navy 2 weeks later.
And would you say that was sort of like self-sabotage kind of behavior?
It was a realization that I couldn't put the effort in anymore.
Yeah.
I was going to drink. I did. I got angry up in my room. I lived in a place that cost $45 a quarter. Lived in an attic.
Yeah.
My best friend was afraid to come in when I went into an episode.
So you were at that point already getting pretty heavy into the alcohol and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but more than that, I think the result of my upbringing had left such a big gap.
Oh, yeah.
That I didn't know how to close.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to catch up. And it just led to more and more confusion and disassociation with school. Let's put it that way. And to me, it was the height of the Vietnam War. I didn't want to go in the Marines or Army and go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And it was a difficult choice. Some people went to Canada. I'd had friends die. And I didn't want to do that. Eventually, maybe a year or two after I joined the Navy, it became apparent, even to my father, that this was a bad war, as if there were good wars, you know.
Right.
And he didn't believe in it, and he realized that the media had lied to him, and that the military had lied to him. A lot of people realized that. Anyway, I joined the Navy. I was the outstanding recruit out of the company. I scored very high on the test battery, which was 3 full days of testing to determine what school you could qualify for. And I went to electronics A school. I didn't complete the whole thing because I had signed up for 4 years. The Navy, while I was in boot camp, changed electronics technician to a 6-year program because there was so much training, they didn't get a lot of sea time out of you.
Yeah.
So they came up to me while I'm in A school and called me out of class and said, "You're going to have to extend for 2 years." And I was respectful, but I said, "I'm not going to extend for 2 years. I signed up for 4 years. I'll do a good job, and then I'm going to get out."
Yeah.
And they pressured me. They berated me. They made fun of me for... the guy actually made fun of me for having 1.5 years, 2 years of college. And I knew that I looked at after 20 years, he was a second-class boilerman, which was an E5. And he had red stripes on for every 4 years you get a stripe. If they're red, it means you have been busted, you screwed up, whatever. All of his were red.
Yeah.
And because he had shore duty, it meant he wasn't even good enough to be at sea with other people. So, nonetheless, I remained respectful. I'll shorten that. I went to submarine school. One was assigned to a submarine in Charleston. So my duty stations were New London, Connecticut, Charleston, South Carolina. Oh, I'm sorry. San Diego, San Francisco, New London, Connecticut, Charleston, South Carolina, Key West, Florida, and Gretna, Louisiana. I had an early out to go back to college, which got messed up because I got busted for like a fool carrying this guy's hash pipe. Mm-hmm. He didn't have any pockets, but I was stupid enough to do that.
Yeah.
And he was playing me.
Yeah.
Well, about 6 of us were heading over from Gretna to take the ferry across the river. We came around the curve, and here's about 9 cops lined up going like this, motioning us forward. And they searched every one of us, and they found that on me. And I got arrested, charged with heroin.
Dang.
Because it was a white powder. They didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And they pulled a little knife out of that, like to cut hashish up with. And he said, "Oh, you got a deadly weapon, too."
Jeez.
Anyway, I went to central lockup, and I lost 10 pounds in 2 days. The bologna sandwiches were rancid, and I couldn't eat them. I got out, and long and the short of it is, I beat the civilian case in court because it was an illegal search.
Yeah.
I didn't let the Navy know that. And a day before I was to get out, I went up to the office and said, "I need a physical to leave the service." I said, "You can't leave the service. You haven't had your Navy trial yet." Uh-huh. And I said, "I'm due to get out tomorrow, and you're required to give me a physical today, and you're required to get me out tomorrow by 10 o'clock. And they realized that I had tricked them, and I got out.
Wow.
More confused than ever. And
how old were you at this time?
22. No, I'm sorry, 24.
Mm-hmm. Early 20s.
Yeah. 24
yeah.
was right, because I had the 2 years of college and 4 years in service. Mm-hmm. I roamed around in New Orleans, and I was approached by a cult member, and who was a woman. And of course, my natural response is I just was enchanted by her. Mm-hmm. And I hung around this cult for a while, and I joined it. The name of it was the Process. They were British originally. Mm-hmm. And they hung around for 6 or 8 years and then dissolved. But I was there for a couple of years. And I realized after that, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
So I was basically afloat somehow, but not in the Navy.
Yeah.
And not knowing where to land. I decided that I would work a couple of years, save my money, and add that to the GI Bill, and I could go back to school. Mm-hmm. And because of my training in the service, I couldn't imagine doing anything other than electrical engineering. And I had a job as a maintenance electrician in a plant here in Knoxville. So I was, if you add electronics technician, electrical engineer, and maintenance electrician, you're getting a pretty well-rounded dip into that pie. And I graduated in 4 years with above, I think it was a 3.1, which wasn't that bad in electrical engineering.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it was pretty tough. I didn't go to graduation because graduation at UT was tens of thousands of people in the hot sun in Neyland Stadium, and I didn't go. I had to mail me my diploma. And, of course, all I heard was how I broke my mother's heart by not graduating because she would have wanted to see that. I tried to explain what that was like, but it didn't do any good.
Yeah.
My father never said one word of congratulations for graduating from college. I've since decided that he was jealous of me for a lot of my life. And I believe that the reason he said nothing about it was due to the fact that he didn't have that opportunity. He was on his own at 16 in the middle of the Depression, and slept under trees on the Knox County Courthouse lawn. And one day he got up and he had 9 dimes left to his name, and he was hungry, and he joined the Army just to get something to eat. And stayed in until they found out he had epilepsy, and they discharged him. He had a rough time.
Yeah.
Very rough time.
What?
Nearly starved a couple of times. But I came home once, and there was a switch on the wall that was faulty, and I was going to repair it. And he called home and got on the phone with me, and he said, "You turn every bit of the power in that house off before you touch anything." And I said, "Daddy, do you know what I do for a living?
Right.
Do you realize?" He said, "I don't have any idea what you do." And I said, "Well, maybe that's because you've never asked."
Yeah.
Not one word.
Yeah.
And all these things sort of reinforced the idea that I look back on things in my life, and I realized that he was either jealous of the opportunities I had, although I paid my way through college every penny.
Yeah. I'm curious, so within the context of the upbringing that you're talking about, and at least up to that point in your life where you'd gone into the service and come out and you start working, were you raised with a sense of a relationship with God? Would you say up to that point in your life where we're talking about that you had any sense of quote unquote spirituality? And then I'm also curious how much that relationship with your parents, because often people sort of conflate their image of God and image of parents, how much that affected your personal.
I was required to go to the Methodist church with them every Sunday.
Okay. So did you associate then God did you view God in a negative light because you associated that obligation with your parents?
I had one spiritual experience when I sneaked into Wesley Woods, the camp in Townsend, to see friends of mine.
Who were there for camp?
Yeah, girls who were there from my high school. And mainly just to do it and show that I could. Well, I got caught.
Yeah.
And That didn't turn out well while I got caught, but it eventually went away. Anyway, while I was down there, I did have some sort of experience that I can't even remember the gist of it now, but I do remember it was a religious experience or a spiritual experience, and I relayed that to my mother. I don't know if my father ever heard about it. And she took that to the bank. In other words, that was going to be me forever, and it wasn't.
Now, you mean like you had some sort of experience in the breaking into the camp?
Yeah, or while I was there, or whatever.
Huh.
And I noticed it, but I eventually just strayed away because I was living on my own. I didn't have anything. Well, I got baptized at 10 years old, I think, and joined the church on the same day, and I passed out. Just hit the floor from the chancel rail.
You were locking your knees out, huh?
No, I was kneeling.
Oh, okay.
And, of course, they picked me up and carried me out. We can't have somebody passed out in this Methodist church.
Yeah.
And I was embarrassed.
Yeah.
Nobody spoke of that ever again.
Huh.
I'll just say I drifted away like a lot of people drift away when they're on their own in their 20s.
Yeah. And internally, just of your own sort of experiences, like while you were trying to find your way in the service and in professional life and whatever, was there any sense of that in your life? Like an internal relationship?
No.
Okay.
If anybody said, "Do you believe in God?" I would have said yes.
Yeah, right.
They said, "Well, what do you do about that?" I would have said nothing.
Okay. Yeah.
If I were being completely honest.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah. So then...
No sense of a need for a relationship, and too busy with every other thing in life.
Yeah. When do you remember that becoming... Like, when did that first happen in your life? Way down the road, or was it in the next kind of sort of events of your life?
You mean when I drifted away?
No, when did you have that first sort of sense of a relationship or need of a relationship with God? Or
okay, yeah, well, because my family didn't communicate, and I didn't know how to communicate. I wasn't allowed to see any girls in high school, so I didn't know how to talk to girls.
Right.
I was at a disadvantage and still feel I'm at a disadvantage in that respect.
Yeah.
And realize how much I missed in learning.
Socialization.
Yeah,
sure.
Learning how to communicate. So I ended up dating a woman whose family also didn't communicate.
Yeah. It's funny how we do that, huh?
Well, I look at it this way. If I'd been attracted to a woman whose family communicated about everything, well, that would have lasted 2 weeks.
Right.
Because I would have been completely intimidated by her willingness to talk.
Right.
And she would have been completely put off by my inability to talk.
Right.
So that just wouldn't work.
Right.
So you end up with your kind.
Right.
And there's two people who don't communicate with each other.
Yeah, trying to make it work, yeah.
Yeah, we stopped at a A&P. She had to go in and get something. And as she was walking to the store, I'm thinking in my mind, there's not much wrong with her. I ought to marry her. That was exactly the thoughts in my mind.
Yeah.
There isn't much that's wrong with her.
Yeah.
So I ought to marry her. And I did. Based on that sublime thinking. Nothing about love. I didn't know anything about love.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to look for in a woman.
Yeah.
Now, I know that sounds silly, but
No.
I just didn't know.
Sure. No, it makes sense.
Okay, we had a son, and I related to him as well as I could, and I was good to him, and I had decided that the job of a parent, I still believe this, is to take every bad thing that happened to you in your upbringing and discard it completely, and take every good thing that happened to you and pass it on to your next generation.
Yeah. Not a bad way to look at it. Yeah.
And after several generations, you can wipe out the bad stuff
Yeah.
and grow the good stuff.
Trick is you got to know and be able to identify the bad stuff, which some people are not able to do.
Yeah, I didn't have a hard time with that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. None of the whippings and beatings, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe a pop on the butt every now and then. I broke that rule one time, and my son had thrown an eraser at a teacher. He was 6 or 7 years old. And rather than think, what's wrong that caused him to do that? And I need to sit down and talk to him, not chastise him, but say, tell me why you think you threw the eraser at the teacher.
Yeah, get to the bottom of it.
We were divorced by then, and he could have, if I'd talked to him, he could have said, I don't like it that I don't see you but once or every other week.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm mad that you got divorced. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
But rather than do that, I whipped him on his butt and his thighs, and he was on the floor on his back, and I'm yelling at him and whipping his thighs. I don't think the actual whipping of his thighs through his jeans and with my hand was as big a deal as the fact that I was absolutely yelling at him, and that he was terrified. And I couldn't take that back, but that's the only time that happened.
Yeah.
I know I'm taking a lot of time, so I'm going to skip to the crux and get on with my spiritual experience in coming back to God. My son suffered death from a horrendous accident. He was nearly cut in half. And while my friend went to get help or call the police and ambulance or whoever, I had to sit with my son, holding him in a field, no one around, for 30 minutes. He was disemboweled, and I could smell the warmth of his insides coming up at me. It wasn't a bad smell, but it was a unique smell. His eyes, nose, mouth were full of sand. He'd had a large sand pile collapse on him, tons of sand.
And he was 8 or 9?
He was almost 8. He was a month before being 8, or 26 days before being 8. The reality of what had happened was hitting me about twice a second. It was like somebody slapping you on the forehead, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Those times, the reality just hit me and overwhelmed me. And then there was a half second of rest from that, and then it came back again. So it was cyclical. It wasn't constant. But when it came back hard. And I realized I've got to tell his mother. I've got to tell my parents. And it wasn't until sometime later We had been to see my parents. And then we were going to my best friend's place. And my father had come around to the driver's side of the car, and he looked me right in the eye with a very serious look on his face. And he said, "Watch him like a hawk, son." And I didn't think of that until much later.
That was your dad?
Yeah, and it was very unusual for him to say that.
Yeah.
And I thought about that. I thought, why did he say that?
Yeah, especially a man who didn't communicate much at all. Yeah, yeah.
But I think from my perspective now, I would say God put those words in his mouth.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, there is one way to look at this as I caused it. Because I had Oliver, who was about 3 or 4, 4 something, in my arms, and we walked up this giant sand pile. I'm talking about a sand pile that could cover my house and my shop. Big. When I got up near the top, I could have dislodged the sand on the other side and caused him to be buried under tons of sand.
He stayed at the bottom.
Yeah, he was at the bottom. And his best friend, my goddaughter, witnessed this. And she suffered anorexia, and later, when she was about 11, and in talking to her since, I mean, she got over it. She decided to live rather than die, even though she got down to 80 pounds, 75 something, and skin and bones. But I'm sitting out in that field, and I made a noise that scared me because I had never heard a noise like that come out of me. It was guttural, but it just scared me because it was almost otherworldly. And then I did a foxhole prayer. And I said, "God, help me get through this." And I didn't even know what this entailed.
Yeah, this is in the moment of your son's dying.
While I'm out there with him alone.
Yeah.
In that 30 minutes.
Yeah.
After the realization of this was hitting me over and over, I said, "God, please help me get through this." That's a direct quote. So in the following days, I'm going to back up one thing. About 2 weeks before, I'd watched a documentary on TV about yet another tribe they'd discovered along the Amazon.
Yeah.
And they studied this tribe, and they realized that this tribe didn't have any long-term grief. So they studied them some more, and they figured out why. When a person died in their family, the family would receive the body. All of the family members would wash the body, wrap the body, do whatever they did to prepare the body for burial. And while they were doing it, they would tell stories about themselves and the deceased that were good.
Yeah.
And they'd go around and tell these stories, and they didn't suffer any long-term grief. And I really liked that because I've always felt that Western funeral deals are made to extend grief as long as possible and to wring as much money out of you as they can get.
Yeah.
And people hold it as a matter of pride that they don't get over losing someone.
That's interesting. I look at it from, not to go off from the story, but it's something I think about quite often. I think you and I have talked about it, but obviously I see funerals a lot, and it's interesting because I would argue that the liturgy, at least, of a funeral and the burial and the way that things used to be were designed to be like that tribe, but we've just, for whatever reason, have sort of
I think
watered it down.
I think the funeral industry, not the church.
Well, it's also culture, and people just, unless you have someone guiding you through that process, people aren't naturally going to just do that. It's not a natural thing, and so we avoid it.
For most people, there's no God in their life.
Yeah.
They don't have anything to fall back on when they grieve.
Yeah.
They don't have any understanding of it other than, I don't think I can ever get over this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we've watered it down so much that it's one of my pet peeves of, like, we hardly have casket funerals anymore, but if and when we do, there's nothing in place to encourage you to stay to watch that casket go in or to put dirt on it the way that we used to and things like that. It's all set up now to just get you out of there. That's not clean and nice and pretty, so let's not do that. And it ties into the grief stuff you're talking about. But anyway, I don't want to derail from the story. Well, I also want to say, just for transparency, so you and I connect through AJ, your son, who we're talking about, who passed. And so that is AJ's. So AJ was my friend in church through his mother, and that is I believe it's the first death I ever experienced. Certainly is the first death that I remember, and definitely the first death of someone who I knew and cared for.
Yeah.
So just naming that our stories connect in that way through AJ. But
AJ had been a Cub Scout for 1 week, and because of this documentary, I decided that I wanted to dress him in his scout uniform because he was going to be seen in a casket in Greenville, because everybody knew my father and knew me and knew him. Mm-hmm. Small town.
Yeah.
And I wanted to dress him in his shirt and neckerchief.
Yeah.
Pants were out of the question. And I used to live my life this way. And I'm just going to say briefly, AA has been a big part of getting me not to live my life this way.
Okay.
But if I were anticipating coming to another person to talk to them, mm-hmm. I saw in my head what I was going to say. I predicted in my head what that person was going to say, which was negative, mm-hmm. and which was going up against what I said.
Wow.
Then I predicted what I was going to say and what they were going to say, and then I was going to come over the desk and choke them to death.
Yeah. Man, just projecting conflict.
Yeah. I did that a lot.
Wow.
Well, I did it in this case.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we're driving from Knoxville to Greenville to do this. Mm-hmm. And my best friend was going to meet me at the funeral home. Somewhere around the Dandridge or Jefferson City exit or between them, I'm driving along, and I felt right here between my breasts in the center of me, let's say the heart, an extreme warmth. And then it started spreading out to all of my extremities all the way to the end. Mm-hmm. And it stayed there for a little bit. Mm-hmm. So my second wife was in the shotgun seat there, and I said, I don't really know how to explain this, but I'm just going to tell you what happened. And I told her just what I told you. And she said, I know, I felt it too. I managed to keep the car on the road.
Yeah.
But I was left with a sense that of peace and that everything will be fine.
From that feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to the parking lot. I don't know why I didn't park next to my friend. It was the only car in the parking lot. I parked 30, 40 feet away. I got out of my car. He got out of his car, and he looked at me with the strangest look on his face, like he saw something about me that was different. I don't know if it was an aura or if it was a look of peace, look of relaxation, whatever. But he saw something different.
Yeah.
And he said, sort of quizzically, he said, "You're going to be okay, aren't you?"
Wow. Wow.
And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to be okay." And his whole body language changed. His shoulders slumped.
Yeah.
And he said, "I thought I was going to have to hold you up. You may have to hold me up."
I love that too. What I love about that experience is the sequence of events, right? Like that last part could have happened, and had we not known what had just happened to you in the truck, or I say truck because you drive a truck now, and in your vehicle, you know what I mean? We would sort of just write that off a little bit.
It wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't have seen me that way.
Right.
Because I wouldn't have been that way.
Right.
I would have been depending on him to hold me up.
Yeah. Wow.
And he obviously saw something. Mm-hmm. I think I've seen an aura around a person one time, and it was the first priest.
It's every time I preach, right?
Moving on. It was our first priest when we became a parish, Gary Jones.
At St. Elizabeth's.
Yeah, I was back at the back of the church standing up, and I was looking at him in the pulpit. I definitely saw an aura around him, and it lasted for quite a while. Anyway. I took the scout uniform. I went in to have my talk with the funeral director, and he's sitting behind his desk, and we're sitting in two chairs in front of his desk. And at one point I said, "I want to dress my son in his scout shirt and neckerchief."
Yeah.
And he said, "Would you like for us to be in the room or out of the room?" Which is the same as taking a great big needle and popping the balloon that I had prepared so carefully to go back and forth, and then me jump over the desk and threaten his life.
Yeah.
And it just deflated all the planning I had made, which was a good thing. And because he had been so accommodating of that request, I said, "Why don't you stay in the room?" And he said, "We'll be back against the wall, and if you need any help, you just let us know." And I thought, golly bum, this just amazes me that I conjured up this contrary confrontation that wasn't. So we went down there, and we had a little bit of difficulty getting the shirt on him because his arms were very rigid and hard to bend. And while we were in the office, he told me, he said, "You realize we've had to do a lot of work on him."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I held him for 30 minutes out in the field." And when I got to his coffin, I saw a lot of excelsior down there to fill her. And the coffin was up high enough that no one could see that.
Sure.
And my putting the shirt on him was a direct result of having seen that documentary.
Yeah.
I thought, I want to participate in this with his body.
Yeah.
And because I don't like, for a long time, I hadn't cared for Western funeral tradition.
Yeah.
When my grandmother died, they put her damn glasses on her in the coffin. And I even said to my mother, this was her mother, I said, why in the world did they put glasses on her?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, son, they just wanted her to look like she did when she was alive. And I said, but she's not alive.
Mm-hmm.
She's not there anymore. I did believe that the soul left the body and that basically you had a meat sack left. And yeah, you treat it with respect, but it's not the person.
Sure.
And to put glasses on, I just thought was absolutely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought all the things they do for people to come around and stare at this body were ridiculous. The makeup, the whole bit. Still do. Anyway, we did what we had to do in Greenville, and then he came down to Church of Good Samaritan, your old church, and where his funeral would be. And there were 2 priests involved. And I asked them both, I said, I would like to deliver his eulogy. And they found that a bit unusual. And they said, are you sure you want to do this? And I said, yes. And they said, the only way they would let me is if I wrote it out.
Oh, sure.
And they said, the time will go much faster than you think. And you need to keep this 20 minutes or under.
That was quite generous. But
well, I think it was the fact that I was his father.
Yes, they're trying to be accommodating for sure.
Yeah, they were trying to be accommodating. And so I wrote it out and I gave it to them and they approved it. And to a great degree, it mimicked, or the stewardship talk that I had given later mimicked this eulogy in the sense that I said we have the illusion of ownership of anything. God owns everything. We think we own things. And my way of explaining this is you put your children and your spouse in the house with your pets. You empty all these storage lockers you've got of stuff, put them in the house, and pull your cars and boats up real close to the house. And with one well-placed match, I can destroy everything you think you own. And it's all gone to ash, except for the bricks. And I did that in the stewardship thing, and I emphasized, I said, you don't even own your children. And I got some strange looks out in the congregation for that. I said, they're God's children, and you're given the privilege to raise them for as long as you have. I delivered the eulogy, and it had an impact on some people. There were people that worked with my then wife who wrote an anonymous note and left in her inbox, who talked about how touched they were by that and how powerful it was to them. And of course I felt good hearing that, not knowing how anybody would take it. And being in a bit of a trance the whole time.
Sure.
I was able to do it and do it well, but still I wasn't exactly what you would call in the moment.
Oh, yeah. No, it's surreal.
Yeah, it was surreal. I'd never done that before. It was my son.
Yeah.
But I did that. And a little bit after all this was over, I realized that my experience on the interstate and at the funeral home and delivering the eulogy was the answer to my foxhole prayer. God, please help me get through this. And I realized that's exactly what happened. God answered that prayer.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, even though this may be a bizarre thought, I thought, if I just ignore this and go back to my usual way of life, the way I expressed it to myself, I said, there's not a place in hell that's deep enough for me. And I don't necessarily believe that now, but at the time, I said, that's what awaits me if I just ignore this.
Yeah, what a great point too, because obviously not, I think that situation happens in our lives constantly, obviously not in such extreme situations, or context, but that point right there that you're making, I think, is something constantly going on with all of us in our spiritual lives, where we do say a prayer, or we have, a need, desire, expression, have some sort of conversation with God, higher power, and then things happen, and I would say more often than not, people never do go back and make the connection of, oh yeah, God was there. Like that wasn't somehow an answer, somehow a response.
Well, I had been married the first time in the Episcopal Church, and I'd since read I liked the fact that they were not doctrinal, that they were liturgical, and didn't throw you out of the church if you didn't believe chapter and verse of what somebody was telling you. I also liked Sam Venable's column about the Episcopal Church, that you don't have to check your brain at the door. And I determined I would go back to church. It wouldn't be so I could put my business card up on the bulletin board, look for connections.
Right.
And I found the St. Elizabeth's by the best possible method I could. And you know what that was?
No.
Yellow Pages.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Phone book.
Yeah.
And it was the closest one. So I made an appointment with a priest, and as a priest, you'll understand the gist of this. His office at the time was where our bookkeeper's office is now, tiny little office. I'm sitting opposite him, and I told him that I'm joining this church, and it's not to make connections. I'm going to be an active part of this church, and eventually you and I are going to be best friends. Well, as a priest who gets every kind of yo-yo that comes in off the street, red flags are going up all over the place with him. He's like, oh, no. Oh, God, another one of these. And he told me much later. We did become good friends. And I became very much involved in the church. I was still drinking. I was supposed to lead evening prayer, noonday prayer, morning prayer, or something. And I was drunk and couldn't get out of my home. And I called him and told him that, and he came to see me, and I felt awful. It was a few years later, I'm going to try to speed up here, that I had an extreme point in my life. That's all I'm going to say about it in interest of time. And I was put in the psych ward at Park West, 4th floor. And I had the humiliating situation of my ex-wife, second wife, having to sign me out of there so I could get out. And one of the requirements was that I see this certain person for counseling. I did, not going to go into that. He insisted every time I met, I asked him for something concrete that would help my life.
Yeah.
By that time, I had quit drinking on my own for 2 years. And it all ended up, I lost my marriage, I lost my house, I lost my car, I lost my job.
Through the drinking. Yeah.
Through being a dry drunk.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I'd quit for 2 years and I was raging mad.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so I go see this therapist who I didn't know was an alcoholic himself. And we got to the end of the 50 minutes, and he said, yeah, okay, come back next Wednesday at such and such. And I said, you didn't ask me anything about drinking, because I was very proud that I had quit drinking for 2 years on my own.
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was another way.
Yeah.
And he said, he looked at me and he said, did you quit to prove you're an alcoholic, or did you quit to prove you're not? I didn't have anything to say. I said, I'll give you an answer next week. And I thought about it all week. And he asked me again, first thing next meeting, he said, did you figure out an answer to that question? I said, yeah. I said, I think I quit because I'm an alcoholic. The reason I quit, I drank so much I was blacking out. It was always when I was driving. And I blacked out from Ringgold, Georgia to my garage in Knoxville.
Wow.
And I usually drove 90 miles an hour, right on 90 when I was blacked out, because I could fade in and look at the speedometer and then fade back out.
Wow.
When I realized I'd blacked out for over 100 miles, probably 120 miles, that morning I had the fear that I would kill somebody's family or kill somebody's children, and that the only thing I'd do is blow my brains out after that. I couldn't live with that.
After going through what you've gone through, yeah. Especially.
Yeah. And I quit. I called my wife at work and told her that I had to quit. She asked if she needed to get it out of the house, and I said, I don't think so. My marriage was already gone, and I didn't realize it at the time. She'd just lost patience with me. I won't waste time getting into that. It'll get me off the subject. Eventually, I succumbed to what the guy always told me at the end of every meeting. He said, go to a meeting. First meeting, he threw a big book to me, and he said, read the first 164 pages of that before you come back next week. I said, okay, I did. He said, what did you think of that? And I gave a ridiculous answer. I said, well, it was interesting, and of course the way it was written showed it was old, and missed the point completely.
Yeah.
I didn't read it like, look at yourself when you're reading this.
Right.
But I eventually gave in to him, and I went to a meeting. And I'm thinking, what should I wear? Which is so absolutely ridiculous, but it reminds me of that scripture. Be not concerned with what you wear or what you shall eat, or, because this is not your life.
Yeah. Not the point here, bub. Yeah.
This is school.
Yeah.
Your life is later. Anyway, I opened the door at Park 40 over there, on Park West Boulevard. And I saw about 6 people on the other side of the room laughing, for crying out loud. They were laughing just before the meeting. They were well dressed, dressed in clean clothes. The men were shaven. They looked like they had jobs. They were hugging each other occasionally, which, whoa.
Feelings.
And I thought, what the hell have I stepped into? I spent the first 4 months either very angry or in tears. And I didn't know why.
All that years and years of bottling stuff up and not expressing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And somebody gave me a sheet that had about 100 to 200 distinct feelings on it.
Wasn't the emotion wheel, was it? The feeling circle?
No,
Oh, okay.
no, it was just a list
Okay.
of feelings, maybe 6 columns, landscape view, and a lot on there.
Yeah.
And I started reading them, and I said, well, I guess that's a feeling. I read the next one. I said, yeah, that's a feeling. And after a while, I realized these are all feelings that I don't recall ever having. And it was still stripped down to rage and euphoria. But I saw there was a possibility. Midway through that first meeting, I also realized I was home. And that's the way I described it. I'm home. This is where I need to be and where I want to be and where I belong. And I'm home.
Yeah.
And that was 30 and a half years ago.
That's what people are probably sick of me saying it, but there are folks like Richard Rohr who say the truest form of the church today in existence is AA. And
So did Billy Graham when asked, what's the most spiritual organization you know of? And he didn't hesitate. He said AA.
Yeah.
The combination of AA and the church brought me back further to God. Let's say deeper to God. I thought AA, when I first joined, was a way to stop drinking. Well, it is.
And most people view it as only that, but it's so much bigger than that.
Oh, it's... When you work the steps, you may be white-knuckling your stopping drinking, like you're thinking about it all day, every day, but you are refusing to do it. And you say white-knuckling because you're just as tense, you're about to explode. And if you work the steps with a sponsor and do it genuinely, you root out the things that you drank about in the first place.
Right, the cause, yeah.
You root out your character defects. You root out your fears. You root out who you hurt in your life, and you're going to make amends to them. If you stole money out of a cash register somewhere that you worked, you're going to go to that place, find the manager, and say, here's $40. I stole this 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I did. Put this in the cash register. Amends means you're correcting what you did wrong, not just saying I'm sorry, but I stole $40. Here's $40.
Well, and just I mean, to put a fine point on that a little bit, like it's obvious, but it's important. You know, you're going through a process of just identifying first what are those things in your life, which many people never go through and do, and especially if you're coming from a world of non-expression, non-emotion. I mean, that's a big process.
And you're writing them down in an organized way.
It's like a life confessional. Mm-hmm.
Well, the interesting thing about the fourth step is there's a whole section on sex. There's a whole section on fear.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple other sections. And as you fill these out, there's a column that says, what was your part in this?
Yeah.
And I filled most of them out, maybe 90%. And then I'm going over this with my sponsor, and I'm saying, I didn't have any part in these. And he just laughed at me. He said, sure you did. And we took one of them. He said, you want to know what your part in that was? I said, I don't have any idea. I think this was all the fault of that person. I said, no, you showed up.
Mm.
You showed up. You participated.
Mm-hmm.
Own it.
Yeah.
It's not his. Own what you own.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay. After that clue, I went home and figured them all out.
Yeah.
Then the fifth step, the fourth and fifth steps are vital for a person to, first of all, conquer alcohol and not have to white knuckle it,
mm-hmm.
and realize that there is an entirely new life that you never imagined it could be.
Which can be scary, too.
It's generally not in AA. I don't know why, but we don't need to get sidetracked on that either. Long and the short of it is, I left a meeting when I was 51 years old, and I was walking down the sidewalk. I felt like I was walking about a quarter inch off the sidewalk. And I also realized that that was the first day of my life that I had been truly happy. Out of my entire life. I was 51 years old. I'd never felt happiness like this.
Wow.
And it was the first of many to follow.
Yeah, it reminds me. I'm so sorry to anyone who listens, because I'm always bringing up Richard Rohr, but I think he's one of the most important voices in the current day church. But it reminds me of, he talks about, and many authors have written about this in different ways, but in his book Falling Upward, he talks about the container. Right, you construct a container in the first half of life. Those are your basic needs and your emotional health and all that stuff. And then if you make it into that second half of life, as he calls it, you finally are freed of that container. But you have to have that container in order to ever then work to be freed of it. And it sounds like certainly not everyone in AA or in recovery, but your story reminded me of, like, I think he would say that's an example of someone who didn't have a container ever constructed. Right. And so it almost sounds like some of the work you were doing, and then that first feeling of happiness for the first time at 51 was because there was finally a structure created to contain your basic needs.
And that structure could not have been created had I not dealt with and rid myself of all the fears I had.
Yeah.
All the anger I had. And I'll tell you, the last anger to go was traffic.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Sounds trivial, but it's not.
No, yeah.
And road rage. I got flipped off once, and I followed this car for 45 miles off the interstate, down country roads. They finally pulled in after 45 miles to a convenience store. I pulled my truck up so they couldn't get out. I got out, and I stuck a gun in the mouth of the driver. I said, now flip me off.
Mm-hmm.
Had it in his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't pull the trigger. And he was pretty much scared.
Oh, yeah, you think.
And I left, and I said to myself, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Chasing somebody for 45 miles and then putting a gun in their mouth. What?
Yeah, you don't even know. You're not even conscious.
This is not right. Something's wrong here.
Yeah.
And eventually, through lots of work, I have freed myself of the anger on the road by a number of methods, but generally, if I'm going to take a long trip, the right lane I don't get into because it's entries and exits, and it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
The one right next to it, I'll get into and drive the speed limit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm leaving 2 more lanes for all the idiots to do whatever they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep 200 to 300 yards between me and the car in front of me, because I realize at 75 miles an hour how long reaction time is, how long it takes to stop a car.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'll do that with blinders on and just cruise down the road at the speed limit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Little tools like that to...
My gun now is purely for self-defense.
Mm. What? So, I guess it's a big timeline, right? And I know your story enough to know there's a lot more to it. What, in terms of spirituality, so you had the beautiful story you shared around AJ in the car ride and all these parts that we spoke about. Was there anything? It sounds to me like it took you probably some time and some years before you really sort of looked back at that, as we spoke about. Was there anything else in your spiritual life and in that relationship with God? Like, what's the next mountaintop?
Well, first of all, I'll say I tried for 7 months to empty his dresser.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I pulled the drawer open, I just had to close it. I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I broke down in tears. I broke down in tears a lot for years.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally learned to embrace that there was healing that happened in that.
Gets back to that system of a lack of emotion, and you're learning to actually embrace those emotions.
Of course, my other son died at 27 years old, and I'd gotten to know him far better, and we were so very much alike, and everybody at church knew him because he was very much involved at church.
For people listening, he was born with...
Yeah, he was born with multiple congenital heart defects and born 2.5 months early, which is nature's way of aborting a baby that's not right, not correct. It happens in animals all the time. We don't speak of it in humans, but that's exactly what's going on. Nature, whatever that is to God, I don't think it is God, but I think God created it, and whatever he put in that wants to abort that. So he was born prematurely, and they were able to keep him alive and get him up to minimum surgery weight and so on and so forth. And I could go on about his life and take too much time, but he had a phenomenal life.
He lived a lot longer than anyone had expected, right? Or am I wrong on that?
There weren't expectations.
Okay.
He died in his 5th open heart surgery.
You said 27?
27, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, it hit me hard because he and I had become so close. Same sense of humor, laughed at the same things. I mean, it was just. But
I deal with a lot of death. I know a lot of people's stories. Losing a child is every parent's nightmare. I know maybe on one hand, folks who have lost one child. You're definitely the only person I've ever met who's lost
all of them.
All your children.
Two.
And can you even, sorry, it may be an unfair question, a hard question.
There are no
but
unfair questions.
What gets you through?
Well, of course, I'd been sober many years. When Oliver was 3 to 4 years old, I used to take him to AA meetings with me and sit him on my lap. And then used to go out to dinner or breakfast after a meeting with 4 or 5 friends. And I wanted him to be among those friends and realize these are good people.
Yeah.
And they're interested in him, and they'll talk to him and back and forth. And that I wanted him to know the organization I was in.
You wanted him to know the home that you had found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a much better way to say it. And he did. God made this character so far beyond his years. He used to stand in the hall, the long hall at St. Elizabeth's, when he was this tall.
A couple feet, yeah.
And just lecture to Jane Gouffon and talk to her and gesticulate. And he'd never seen any kids till he was over 2 years old. All he'd seen was adults. Because he was in hospital in intensive care for 2 years.
Yeah.
He was a unique character. Never complained about his heart. The only complaint where he ever mentioned his heart, he was lying on his couch, watching TV. I think he was a preteen or a teenager. They turned into slugs at that time. And he's watching TV, and I'd gone into his room, and it was a wreck. And I came in here, and I said, "Hey, your room's a wreck. Go clean it up." And he said, "I can't. I've got heart problems." And he's grinning, and I said, "Get your ass and get in there and clean that room up." Of course, I'm smiling, too, and that was the only time he ever mentioned his heart. All of his classmates absolutely loved him. He was known all over the school. He was smart enough to get the biggest guy on the football team to be his friend. And it was the monster man in the middle.
Yeah.
And the quarterback, who I think is always the coach's son. You know how that crap goes in Little League or whatever.
Yeah.
He and his buddies tried to put Oliver in a locker and lock him up and, taking advantage of him because he was small. He was half the size of his mates. And that big guy was always around. And he came up in front of the quarterback, got right in his face, and he said, "I think you need to leave Oliver alone." And the guy's backing up, and he said, "Hey, we didn't mean anything, man. We were just having a little fun, He also did the same thing at UT. He befriended the football team, and they looked out for him. Because he had a sense of, I don't want to be walked over.
Yeah.
And I can't do anything myself, but I'm smart enough to know.
Yeah.
I've got my tribe around me.
Right.
They do my heavy work.
Yeah. Yeah. Smart.
And anyway, the whole time in AA and in the church, I will say that my connection to God deepened, but not on a steep curve.
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, 2.5 to 3 years ago, I had joined this group online that was about 10,000 people around the world. Sort of an unusual group called Connecting Consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty broad in what you could post. I posted a lot of photographs on there that people loved, and things I'd made, lots of things. And I noticed that there was this one person who commented on everything I posted in 1 or 2 words or 3 words. That was all.
Mm-hmm.
And the comments were feelings about what I had posted and what it meant to them in 2 or 3 words. You could get in touch with people offline or not in the middle of this 10,000. And I got in touch privately, and long story short, we connected over the phone. I've never seen anybody who had a relationship with God quite like her. And it took her 28 years till she got to a point where she had conversations with God that were no doubt in her mind that they were back and forth, and that she would wake up at 3 o'clock every morning for this. And not only was God there, but several of the apostles were there. The Virgin Mary was there. Job was there. Her ex-husband who had died, and he was further back. And I'd gotten to a point where I didn't discount anything or question it. I listened, assuming that I'm being told the truth, and I felt like I was. And I longed for that. Well, this woman had an absolutely horrendous upbringing. I won't get into describing it, but some of the worst things you can think of. And overcame those. But she still would get lost and down and not grounded and whatever. And I would talk to her over the phone, and I would say exactly what she needed to hear. And a lot of times I could listen as I was saying things and know this isn't coming out of my brain. This is too good. And it's worded too well. And it's not coming out of my brain. It's being given to me to say. And, the next 5 times I talk to her, that might not happen. And then it happens again. And it happened probably 4 times in the last 2 years. Could have been more, I don't know. But it was obvious to me that God was speaking to her through me. And she would experience that sometimes to me.
So, I mean, that whole conversation, I get the sense almost like you and me might have to do a number 2 of this, because there's so many places in your story that we could drill in and deep dive. But
well, she and I have, she more than I has brought up the subject of God put us in each other's path for a reason.
Yeah, sure. But was that sense of like, I mean, that experience we could call, you were tapping into the spirit, some would say. I mean, that reminds me of musicians or writers, they'll talk about there's this thing they tap into and it's as if they're not speaking. So that, I mean, I would call that a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
Do you have any of those moments? Like, so here we are, we've got this long journey of your sort of, this probably sounds way too extreme of a way to put it, but like almost like you're learning to be human, right? You're learning to be whole.
I'm learning what a human is.
Yeah,
and what it isn't.
Right. But I mean, like, but then you have these experiences, like on the way to the funeral home. You're naming this one with this person now.
And I have had experiences like that with the person that I call my surrogate granddaughter that I never had. Mm-hmm. And she had a crappy grandfather, and I'm her grandfather figure. She's also a student of mine in woodworking. And I met her the first time she joined AA. And I heard her mention something about woodworking to somebody else, and I said, "Are you really interested in woodworking?" She said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I can teach you woodworking."
Do you mean you had experiences of just connection, or what with her?
Well, first of all, it was through the woodworking.
Yeah, yeah.
But then we connected in a way that neither of us defined, it just was.
Yeah.
I saw the areas that she needed guidance in. And I bought her 2 books after I perused them, and I said, she needs these 2 books. And I said, I gave them to her, and I said, you may read these or not, but I think they would be very good for you. And I'm talking about a woman who fits into a pattern that I've seen so many times in my life, who thinks so little of herself that they choose losers.
Sure.
In men that'll beat them up, men that aren't worth shooting, in my opinion. And they'll, even if they're beat up, they'll still go back to them.
Yeah.
And I helped her find a better opinion of herself, a self-worth. She's in an extremely good job now. She's getting her master's degree and finishing that in September. She's working for a technical company. They value her very much.
Yeah.
And that was a year and a half after she was working at Home Depot.
Yeah.
She was working in Oak Ridge.
So that is certainly in our lives. I think people, and I've said this too often too, I don't know. It gets me all into the, and we don't have time to even dive into this now, but like, this is an ancient conundrum, right? Paradox of when we talk about this thing we call God. It is the creator of all things, the creator of the universe, and then yet the paradox is that we also speak of this creator God as if it cares enough about each of us that it would, these experiences of a relationship, put certain people on our path, put us in other people's path. And that seems to have, for lack of better word, divine.
Yeah, I have the same feeling that God put us in each other's path. And she feels that way too.
Right.
And if I look at the experience with her, the experience I still have with this woman in Florida, and other experiences, I believe that it's because of my willingness and my want to experience God and have some sort of relationship with God, which I still think is in its infancy compared to.
But it's that openness and willingness.
Openness and willingness.
And if we're conscious enough to look, right, and
it's
open
like
our eyes.
Little Feat's song, "Willing."
Yeah,
you know that song. Tucson to Tucumcari, Tehachapi to Tonopah.
What? Go ahead.
It's every day when I wake up, I thank God for living through the night and waking up. I try to make every moment of my day being aware of God. Now, I don't do that every moment.
Sure.
But I get better at it.
Yeah.
And I want to get better at it.
And that's key, right? Because if we just walk around unconsciously.
And I think that God would not have put anything in my path when I was out in the boonies rejecting him. Why would he do that? It'd be a waste.
It's an interesting question because we don't know, right? Maybe there was stuff there all the time.
But in my logic, well, let's say it didn't connect.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, he may have laid it out there.
Yeah.
But he also may not have laid it out there because he knows.
Yeah.
This person's not going to connect.
You remind me of there's this movie. It's old now. It was like late 90s, called Waking Life, and they shot it with a handheld camcorder at the time, and then they took that footage and ran it back through the computer, and they had different artists. It's visually really entertaining because it'll transition between different artists and they'll take that footage and do whatever they want with it. The dialogue, however, is someone in a dream state, and he's encountering all these different characters, and it's a great film in terms of the philosophical, theological conversations that are had. But there's this one quote in it that I love that you're making me think of, and it says, the guy says, all time really is, right? This idea of this thing we call time. All that really is God constantly offering us the opportunity to return to God, and our constantly rejecting the offer.
You know why there is time? It's to keep everything from happening at once.
Sometimes it feels like it still does, but I want to be conscious of time because we've recorded a while, but and we can certainly do a number 2 and do deep dives into some of these things. But I want to ask the one question I ask everybody as well. I think we already know the answer to this, but would you say what is the most quote unquote spiritual experience you've ever had in your life? I'm assuming it's that moment in the car on the way to the funeral home.
That would be the most
like experience,
awareness I've had of God's intervention on me.
Yeah.
And it was the most needed so far in my life. Even after losing both my children, and I didn't say this earlier, but this is important for me to say, and it may sound like pure machismo, but my feeling is a human being is supposed to and is required to deal with whatever hand they're dealt. That it's not appropriate or passable to just collapse from it. For me, you deal with whatever it is. If I had 3 limbs cut off today, I'm supposed to deal with that. I'm supposed to deal with pain.
It's part of the experience.
I'm
and the journey.
supposed to deal with loss. Yeah. I'm not supposed to break down into a pile of jelly. Mm-hmm. I'm supposed to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that can be very hard.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's required.
Well, what I hear you saying, and I hear what you're saying, that that could come off as like, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and whatever, but it's not. But there's a whole thought out there that, we in theology and religion, we talk about souls, and as if, we don't know, but we talk about as if there's this separation, this thing that leaves us and it's separate from the body. But some people, and we entertain ideas about reincarnation and, is it just one life and whatever, but there's a lot of people out there that believe that that this whole life experience is just that, is a journey and an experience. And we're each here to learn something. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's a different way of saying what you're saying. Right. And they'll even describe it as if we as a soul choose, prior to entering the world, choose the experience and the journry that we wish to be on.
I'm familiar with that.
Which, so similar thinking.
You
like,
want to know
this is
the
for
one
a reason.
thing, the very one thing that I have missed in this life that I really, really wish I had experienced. Can you guess what that might be? Mm-mm. I see people either in real life or in a movie or whatever who are thoroughly and absolutely in love with each other. In the truest sense. I wish that I had experienced that. And if I ever were to get the chance to come back and live a life, I would want to run into a woman who was the expression soulmate.
Yeah, yeah.
But to experience absolute love like that.
Yeah.
In the framework of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Again, whole other conversation, but love, I don't know, man. There's so many different versions of love, so many different, but I hear you.
Well, in neither marriage.
And is that
well?
really?
My second marriage. My wife and I went out to lunch from work, and I said, "Why don't we go down to the Justice of Peace and go ahead and get married?" And she said, "Okay."
Yeah.
So we did.
Yeah.
And came back to work and told everybody, and it was sort of like the rest of my life from 20 on or 18 on. I wanted to do the most outrageous things because it's the only way I knew to relate to people. Is they're going to know me because I'm the one that'll jump off the second story into the sand pile.
Right. It makes sense with the background. Yeah.
And I had to find a way to be a part of, even if it was somewhat ridiculous.
Yeah.
They're going to notice me because I'll do things they won't do. I'll do ridiculous things they won't do, shocking things they won't do. But they'll laugh at me and they'll be amazed that I would do that. And that's where I find my worth.
Sure. Early on, sure.
It's not just I'm worthy because I'm a creation of God.
Well, and I'm gonna end on this, but the note. The idea that you just sort of put forth of part of our purpose here is to go through and live through and experience whatever that life is, whatever we're dealt, right? One, I say all the time, part of what I love about ministry and what I love about doing this podcast is I get to hear people's stories more fully and know their life story more fully, which amazingly most of us never do with each other. and I get to share people's stories to the world through this, which is cool. But yeah, I guess I just want to say, I think when I see Earle Wright and know your story, I don't have the words for that. You're seeing and knowing what you've gone through and hearing your journey, I think becomes a blessing and a blessing and a teaching and a guidance to other people.
I have known that to be true, and I'm not saying that as braggadocio. But I think because I have endured through a lot of my experiences, a lot of people have found strength in that.
Well, and it's just that, I mean, just briefly, like if one meets Earle, Earle's a funny, entertaining guy who I would say would never come across as like not knowing how to talk to.
But you know what that is? That's still a carryover.
Oh no, I see that.
Of
now.
I've got to be
I see
this.
Yep.
To be worthy or accepted. I don't know how to just be me.
I see that.
And fit in.
I see that. Right. It's almost still, an overcompensation.
I'm going to be outrageous.
Right. But what I'm saying is no one could know all of these extremely deep and trying and difficult things that you've gone through. And so when someone experiences Earle as this pleasant, intelligent, funny, outgoing person, and then they know that story, it's know your story and your journey. It's very impactful. So I think I think you're right. Like the journey that you're on and living, as rough as it's been, ends up being also a gift to others. So,
and to realize,
but I also like you, so that's why.
Well, I mean, who doesn't?
It's hard not to.
It's hard not to like me.
Yeah.
But I also think that, for lack of a better word, through my belief and perseverance, that God has blessed me in spite of those things.
Yeah.
Over and over and over.
Sure.
And there's two things I want to say before we quit this.
Yeah, I'm running out of track here.
Yeah. I want to say that I helped both my parents through to death.
Oh, that's powerful. Yeah.
With a good attitude. I forgave them. Mm-hmm. And my father was 2 weeks from death, and I had to pick him up and hold him over the toilet and wipe him and do everything for him. He weighed under 100 pounds, and I was laying him back in bed once, and he looked me right in the eye, and his chin started to quiver, which meant it was all he could do to get the words out. Mm-hmm. And he said, and it's hard for me to get these words out too. He said, son, if we had it to do all over again, we'd have done a lot of things differently.
Wow.
And what I said was, I know, don't worry about it. Everything's okay. Mm-hmm. Which is my way of trying to leave him with no worries at all, that everything's fine.
Well, what I see in that is just the forgiveness and reconciliation. I mean, that's full circle the whole story.
Yeah.
There's
one more thing I want to say.
Okay. All right.
I've had fell in my yard about a year ago, tore my knee up, and it was torn up for 8 months. Mm-hmm. And I would hobble or use a stick or whatever. It occurred to me after 8 months of this that I'd never prayed to ask God to heal my knee. Mm. And I prayed to God, and you know what I said? I said, God, please heal my right knee. If it's your will, heal my right knee. Mm-hmm. And 2 days later, I walked with no pain and I walked normally, and I have since. And the reason I want to say that is I've told that to a number of people at church. And a lot of them have sort of backed up a step and looked at me like,
sure. Yeah, we want to doubt those
he's
things.
strange,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. But it's something I tell people all the time. We fail to ask. We fail to name our needs or desires.
And I look at it as, in a way, as just not believing this stuff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure.
You believe it to a point, but
we've got a lot of that.
no, I don't want to go there. That scares me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've told people about that, like, you know, dumb me, I forgot to pray about it.
Yeah.
So I did. Now it's healed. That doesn't mean God's going to do it every time for me.
Sure.
But by golly, roll the dice every time.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
Do your part.
Yeah, right.
Ask.
Right.
And that's the two things I want
Okay.
to
All right. Well, listen, this has been fun. I've been looking forward to doing this a long time. I count you a friend. I love you. And, your stories and your journey and who you are as a result of it are blessings to me and to other people, I think. So I appreciate you doing this
today than I've ever been in my life.
Well, let's keep that going.
And when I hear people tell me how bad a day they're having, I say, no, you're not having a bad day. Think of how blessed you are. I said, did you have to hunt food today to see if you could eat? You know.
Sure.
I'd like to do a spinoff.
Yeah. We're gonna have to come back and talk because you and I can talk a lot. So, but anyway, again, thanks for doing this. Appreciate you. And
you won't thank me as much when you get my invoice.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. We'll do it again sometime, man.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.